Rogers, as the originator of client-centered therapy and a vigorous champion of a humane, person-oriented tradition in American psychology, has been without doubt the most influential leader in the counseling profession. Through his many writings, which include On Becoming a Person, Client-Centered Therapy, and on counseling and psychotherapy, and through national leadership, which has included the presidency of the American Psychological Association, Dr. Rogers has served as a model of scientific integrity, personal openness, genuineness, and warmth to two generations of professionals. From his early interest in individual therapy, his interests have broadened to include a deep and abiding concern with the process of education, best expressed in his book, Freedom to Learn. The potential of the encounter group movement, reflected in his book, Carl Rogers on Encounter Groups, and marriage and the relationships between men and women, the subject of his book, On Becoming Partners. Dr. Rogers has addressed himself to the question of whether there are any factors in the partnership between men and women which distinguish between those which are satisfying, enriching, growthful, and permanent from those relationships which are unenhancing, ending in unhappiness, separation, or divorce. In this film, he describes the threads which he has discerned in successful and fulfilling partnerships. With Dr. Rogers is Dr. John M. Whiteley, a member of the Social Ecology Faculty and Dean of Students of the University of California, Irvine.
Carl, what have you learned from your investigations about the themes of enrichment between men and women?
Well, I think through interviewing quite a number of couples, I have come to some thoughts about some of the elements of what constitute a healthy marriage and perhaps a continuing one. Let me say first, I think that lots of people think of marriage sort of as a cage. They lock themselves in with a vow, and then they may try to, decorate the inside of the cage with a nice furniture and a swimming pool and everything else, but it's still a cage. And I think one of the things I've learned is that if it's going to be a healthy marriage, it is a flowing kind of process in which the two people are dedicated to working together on the changing process of the present relationship. Not because it's a duty, but because they're finding it rewarding in the present moment. And they want to nourish it and have it continue to grow. I think that one of the partners can begin to work on that process, but unless it becomes a mutual working together on a relationship which is changing all the time and in which they're working on the present, I don't think it does much good to try to straighten out the past. You can't change the past. And it doesn't do too much good to speculate about the future. But they can work on the changing present in order to try to enlarge it, enrich it, make it more meaningful for both of them.
In describing this commitment to the process of a relationship, you seem to be leaving out the noble sentiments of I love you or I exist to make you happy. Why is that? What did you learn about?
Because I think just the plain statistics show that, and this may sound cynical or something, but it's just the truth, that no matter how sacred the vows are or how much the person means them at the time, they do not hold. If the marriage becomes really unsatisfactory, it's going to either break up, as in Los Angeles County, 4 out of 5 of them do, or else.
Let's stay there again. Not 4 out of 5 marriages break up.
4 out of 5. In 1971, there were 4 applications for dissolution of marriage. to every 5 applications of marriage in Los Angeles County. That's an urban county, but I have a feeling that that's not typical of the country, but I feel it may be typical of what the country is coming to. And so we have to recognize we're dealing with a failing institution as it is. And part of what I'm saying is that I think it is failing because for many reasons, but one reason is that too many people do regard it as a box into which they've shut themselves, and now they're going to stay there for the rest of their lives.
So the static quality of I exist to make you happy, or I'm going to dedicate myself to making our marriage work, isn't, from your investigation, a really useful thread or a hopeful commitment even.
No, I really don't think it is. As I say, that may sound almost cynical or shocking, but people cannot keep vows which no longer have any meaning in the present. They might have had at the time, but they can't keep them in the present. And that's why I think if we could only change the concept of marriage from being this cage idea to a flowing river in which perhaps the 2 partners are trying to swim together or canoe together or whatever analogy you want to use, that's when they get committed to the fact that nobody knows what's around the next bend. They've got to be working on the changing quality of the relationship as it is at this moment if it's going to be a healthy marriage.
Well, if a commitment to the present, to the process of working through the relationship is one thread, what else have you learned?
Well, I think there are other elements, and one of them certainly has to do with communication. I think that this applies in many relationships beside marriage, but applying it to marriage, all of us feel at times bored with the other person, or angry, or really very happy about the situation, or various feelings. We don't always communicate those, and I don't think it's necessary. But if I'm continuously bored with my partner, or feel continuously resentful or angry, I had better voice that. I think one does much better to take the risk of communicating feelings of that sort in a marriage relationship, rather than to think they can be shut out of the picture.
That seems to run counter, though, to the conventional wisdom, which is if there's a problem, we'll sort of put it aside, and we really won't have to deal with persisting feelings.
And I've interviewed so many couples, sometimes they can put it aside for a year, sometimes for 5 years, probably some of them even longer. But it doesn't stay put in this day and age. I was talking the other day to a young wife who no longer loves her husband, and he phoned her from a distant town to tell her he was sleeping with the neighbor's wife, which shows something of his attitude toward the marriage. I couldn't quite tell why he phoned her. But they had never communicated this, and her whole feeling was that, well, she was bound up to a life of martyrdom, that she had vowed she would live with this man. She was stuck with it no matter what. And she may stick with it for a while, but that isn't going to last. That just isn't going to last. So that any persisting feeling, I think, is better off for being communicated. I think the marriage is more healthy. And this applies to positive feelings, too. Men in our culture don't easily say how tenderly they feel toward somebody else, or for some men and some women, it's terribly hard to really say and mean it, I love you, largely because they're thinking of this as a permanent vow. But if they could recognize, you know, right now, I just love you a lot, that could have tremendous meaning for them.
I would wonder if people don't feel it's a pretty risky path you're encouraging them to go on, for a wife to say to her husband, I simply don't find our sexual relations rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
Or vice versa. For a man to say that to the woman is risking an awful lot about the process of who they are, and certainly relating it to the first thread, you're putting a pretty risky set of feelings on working on the process. Why is that a good thing to do?
I think there's no use kidding ourselves. Any partnership between a man and a woman is a risky business. Those figures I cited show that the risk is not imaginary. Mm-hmm. It's a very real risk. So the question is not whether you're going to take a risk. The question is, which is the greater risk? And my feeling is that you are really taking much less of a risk to say, to use your example, if the wife says to the husband, you know, I just don't feel the sexual relationship is good from my angle. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's risky. But the outcome of that is much more likely to be something coming back from him. That mm-hmm. He'll say, well, I never realized that, or I thought you were satisfied, or well, it's great for me, or at any rate, they're off on a pathway of communication in which mm-hmm. they begin to reveal themselves to each other. And that gets them into the present, also just naturally gets them into the question of, well, what are we going to do about this? I mean, mm-hmm. the moment a problem is faced openly, it's very hard to just let it sit there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so people begin to think about what steps they could take to remedy the situation.
What else have you learned?
What else? Well, one thing that probably would seem surprising in view of the fact that so often marriage is thought of as sort of a merging of two people, or mm-hmm. or the wife submerging herself to the husband's position and so on. I don't find that helps. I think that marriages that are healthy and likely to continue, and the ones that have continued, are those in which each partner has developed his or her own separate and unique self, which is a lifetime process of discovery and trying to be more of one's real feelings and so on.
That's a pretty paradoxical notion you're introducing, though, that a man and a woman can't become one as partners until they become two.
I think it is paradoxical, and like a number of paradoxes, I think it's quite true. I think that many people, probably more women than men, have found that that if they feel, I'll really submerge mm-hmm. myself mm-hmm. in your interests, I'll be your partner. I'll be your partner in a secondary sense. Mm-hmm. I'll be the supportive one and so on. That may work all right for a time, but again, that's not a very good prognosis for a healthy continuance of their marriage. It's much more exciting for two separate people to be involved in a partnership where they can share each other and each other's interests and each other's differing thoughts and values than it is to be artificially together.
That does run counter again to the conventional wisdom that somehow a man and a woman have to share every interest together, and yes. the health of their relationship is in the how totally intertwined they are in almost all our interests.
Well, I think there's a lot of both folk wisdom and statistical evidence that I would be inclined to challenge. A large area of common interests, yes, that's helpful, but not if it's sort of artificially compressed. I mean, if they happen to have common interests, well and good. But if they try to, if one tries to submerge interests in order to merge with the other person, that I don't think is good. Of course, they can develop interests together. That's a very healthy thing.
It seems that our society is really offering, however, a set of instant identities that tend to keep people from developing as separate selves, which may have really long-range, disastrous consequences for the permanence of the partnership or the enrichment of it.
I have certainly come across a number of instances of exactly that, where one partner or the other, it's more often the wife, but not always, hopes to find, well, I'll put it in feminine terms for the moment. Perhaps the wife hopes to find herself by taking on the identity of her husband. And that may seem like, quite a relief for a time. There's no longer any necessity of looking for herself. But in this modern, changing, individualistic world, I will be highly skeptical that that can last permanently. At some point, she's going to begin to feel, I'm not him. Here I've had all these feelings which are different from the ones he has. I'm not the person he is. I'm really a different person. And what am I going to do with that? But usually, if she has found her identity in her husband and his work and his interests and so on, all these other feelings pile up to the point where they get quite explosive, so that that again is why I put in the notion of expressing any persisting feeling, because otherwise it does pile up until it blows the cork, and that can blow the marriage too.
You mentioned 3 threads. Have you found any others?
Well, there's one other element. I think that in the healthy marriage, people are not trying to, neither partner is trying to live by the expectations that society places on them, or by the shoulds that get oppressively put on them by family, by religion, by others.
You mean for what a man ought to be like, and
That's
how he
right.
ought to behave?
How a wife ought to be, and how a husband ought to be, and so forth, I think that the more they can drop those roles and expectations, the better off the marriage is likely to be.
And work out something for them that's
Fulfilling.
fulfilling.
They turn to the things that they find valuable and real, not what, in other words, the wife behaves in ways that are satisfying for that marriage, not the way that a wife is supposed to behave. The husband behaves in ways that are satisfying for that partnership, not what he's supposed to be according to the books or society or religion or anything else.
What are the pressures on the woman that you've seen for a specific kind of role?
I think the woman's role is certainly changing rapidly at the present time, but there's no doubt that in the past to be passive and submergent and supportive, and we're pretty well away from obedience, but at any rate, there are a lot of role expectations on the woman.
And what about on the man?
On the man, he's supposed to be the provider. He's supposed to be the responsible one. He's supposed to be much less emotional. He can't cry. His wife could, but the man can't cry. There are a lot of things that, and he's supposed to look after his wife. Can he provide for her properly? All that.
That seems to leave out the child that's in all of us, or the kinds of feelings that are very human, but not rewarded or approved by society as a whole.
And the fact that in every man there is partly a woman, and in every woman there's partly a man. I mean, we kid ourselves into thinking we're either completely masculine or completely feminine. We're not. A man can weep and get emotional and very tender, and a woman can be strong and take initiative and have lots of purpose and drive. And those are real parts of them in addition to the things that we usually think of as masculine and feminine.
So the key thing here is to learn in the crucible of the relationship a satisfying way for each to relate toward the other.
That's right. The things that they sense really have value in their partnership. Never mind what the world says.
Well, you've singled out 4 threads here: commitment to the process of the relationship, becoming separate people before you can really become a partnership, working out a satisfying sex role vis-a-vis the other partner, and lastly, importantly, risking communication on the persisting feelings that are a part of any relationship. These are not the typical things that are taught to us as people as part of development, either when we're younger or during those critical years when lasting, or at least the start of partnerships are formed between men and women. How should our education be different for enriching partnerships?
I think one of the things that I feel most strongly about after interviewing quite a number of couples is the horrible lack of preparation for partnership in our schools, in our families, in our culture. Even primitive cultures prepare their people for being adults and being partners, but we have almost none of it. I have a fantasy, sort of, that of what might be a real preparation for partnership. I would hope that in growing up, perhaps the fellow and the girl in their respective families could be part of a family group in which, and by a family group I mean something quite specific, where the family gets together to really discuss things that are of significance to each member of the family, and perhaps expresses their doubts and their gripes and their dissatisfactions with each other, and where they enter into a problem-solving point of view in relation to family problems. That would be a very beginning preparation, which could start as early as the child can understand anything. Then I think in the early years of school, if it could only become true that expression of feelings, no matter if they were good or bad, was recognized as a normal and natural thing. You don't just have to give answers to arithmetic problems. You can tell what you feel about arithmetic or about your home or whatnot. That's preparation for partnership, really, though we never think of it as such. And where at that same age, children could begin to accept honest feedback from other people. They could learn that they may think they come across as very friendly. Perhaps someone else sees them as very cold. That's important to learn, and there's no reason why they couldn't learn that in childhood. This has nothing to do with sex or marriage in the sexual aspect of it, but it does have to do with marriage as a partnership. And then as they grow older, I think that in high school and college age, there could be so much gained from mixed discussion groups of fellows and girls dealing with problems of dating and sex and marriage and the whole bit, where they would begin to realize some of the issues. I'll admit that it would take good leaders for that, and I think at the present time those are rather few in the public school area. Perhaps the churches might help to supply some of that. Then we could train them if we really had a will to do so. But people don't learn what to do with anger or with conflict. They have no notion of how to deal with it. Or, as I said before, with tenderness or loving feelings. And all of that could be a part of the training. Then I think a particularly crucial point is when fellows and girls begin going together. I don't care whether they're dating or engaged or beginning to live together, before they've come to the final decision that they think they might get married, that's a time when groups of such couples could be intensely valuable. Because in a group with more feedback from other people, they could find out that some of their perceptions of each other are grossly mistaken. Some of their values aren't shared. I think so often the individual couple tends to keep their conversation on a fairly superficial basis. But in a group that is at all skillfully led, they find there are many other facets of themselves that they need to explore. And they could find out some of the mistakes they're making, as well as some of the strengths in their partnership. Then, of course, just to top it off, I think that in my fantasy, if after marriage and before many troubles develop, if there could be couples groups where they could find that the problems they have as a couple really aren't so different from problems that some other couple has, where they could begin to share their means of problem solving. How do you work it out in regard to finances between you and your wife? And what do you do about the fact of sexual incompatibility or seeming sexual incompatibility? And what do you do about the problems you're having with the children and so forth? They could begin to educate themselves, learning from each other. And I think that would, well, I think if that whole fantasy were true, we would have far more satisfactory partnerships. Many of them might break up before they ever became solidified as a marriage, which to my mind would be probably a very good thing. They might learn